Khalid Zaheer, and we will cover basically four segments in this session, and each segment will be of 15 minutes almost. We need to be very concise about the time because we need to finish this session in 60 minutes, inshallah. First session will be from chapter 6 and the verse 12 and 20. The second segment will be about Sunnah, the third view. The third segment will be about a contemporary issue faced by Muslims today. And the fourth will be any question answer related to previous three segments, inshallah. So now Dr. Khalid Zaheer will be presenting and taking the charge of the class.
Thank you very much.
Yes, Dr.
नहमदुहु व नुसल्ली अला रसूलिहिल करीम अम्मा बाद फ़अऊज़ु बिल्लाहि मिनश शैतानिर रजीम बिस्मिल्लाहिर रहमानिर रहीम. I am starting the first of the four segments, and this has to do with the explanation of a Quranic passage. What I have done in this particular segment is, as some of you who have been regular would recall, that I picked a few verses from the chapters, surahs of the Quran in a sequence. So we started from Surah Al-Fatiha, the first chapter, then Al-Baqarah, Al-Imran, Al-Nisa, Al-Ma'idah, and now we have reached the sixth surah, the sixth chapter, Surah Al-An'am. In this surah, verse 12 says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم قل لمن ما في السماوات والأرض. Ask them, that is, ask these rejecting disbelievers, polytheists, the people whom the Quran was addressing. لمن ما في السماوات والأرض. To whom belongs the heavens and the earth? The people who were the immediate addressees of the Quran, they believed in God. They believed that there was only one God who created the heavens and the earth. And despite that understanding and belief, what they would do is that they would ascribe partners with Him who are, in their understanding and opinion, running the affairs of this world by assisting Him and by becoming His ministers, His helpers, etc. So the Almighty continues to reject this understanding on the basis of arguments. And here again He is asking them this question. Ask them, He is telling the Prophet, God's mercy on him, ask them, to whom belongs the heavens and the earth? To whom belong these creations? قُلْ لِلَّهِ. Tell them, to Allah, to God belong everything that is there in the heavens and the earth. This answer is actually the answer of those who were being addressed. So they did not disagree with this answer. And it goes on to say, كَتَبَ عَلَى نَفْسِهِ الرَّحْمَةِ. He, the God who has created the heavens and the earth, has written it down. Kataba, has made it binding on Himself. Ar-Rahma, to be merciful. That is, God is merciful. God has resolved, God has decided that He is going to be merciful, and He would not stay away from this commitment under any circumstances. Then He goes on to say, لَيَجْمَعَنَّكُمْ إِلَى يَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ لَا رَيْبَ فِيهِ. Most certainly He is going to gather all of you on the day of judgment, about whose arrival there is no doubt. That is, the day of judgment, the reality of it is beyond any shadow of doubt. So, the Quran, in other words, is clarifying that the fact that the Almighty is going to bring a day which is going to be the day of judgment, it is primarily because God is merciful. God has decided, He has chosen, He has committed Himself to be merciful. And in order for Him to be merciful, He has decided that He is going to bring a day of judgment whose arrival is absolutely sure, beyond any shadow of doubt. This worldly life is not fair. It's not fair not because God has no control over it, God forbid. It's unfair because God has chosen to give humans freedom in a limited domain of their lives. This freedom was necessary for humans to go through the trial that this life is all about. He has decided that this life is going to be the life of trial, and the next life is going to be the life where He is going to reward or punish people on the basis of their performance in this life. Now, obviously, that would mean, and that has actually resulted in the fact that there are many people who are treated unfairly in this life. They go through difficulties, tribulations, trials, and because of the wrong behavior and attitude of others. So the Almighty says that He will not allow this to continue to go on. He is merciful. He is concerned about His creation, humans, and therefore He will make sure that on the day of judgment, all people whose rights were harmed, they are compensated for what happened to them, and those who caused people to be harmed and treated adversely, they are going to be punished. And that is because God is merciful. This is exactly what we recite in Surah Al-Fatiha when we say, Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, Ar-Rahmanir Rahim. God is merciful, His mercy is everlasting. Maliki Yawmiddin. After Ar-Rahman, Ar-Rahim, immediately follows the mention that He is going to be the master of the day of judgment, thereby clarifying that the day of judgment would come apart from other reasons because God is merciful. And Him being merciful implies it is something that necessitates that He should bring a day of judgment. الَّذِينَ خَسِرُوا أَنفُسَهُمْ فَهُمْ لَا يُؤْمِنُونَ. And those who cause harm to their own souls, they are the ones who don't believe. This is a recurring theme of the Quran. The Quran continues to mention that the message of God, which the Quran is, appeals to humans, their nature, their soul, their conscience, if they have cared to keep it intact, preserved, and has remained pure and has not been allowed to be contaminated, spoiled by misbehavior and bad conduct. But those who indulge in misbehavior and conduct incorrectly, negatively, they are the ones who cause harm to themselves. They don't cause harm to anybody else. They harm their own souls because they are spoiling their own good nature, and on the day of judgment they are going to be punished. So that the Almighty says, Allazina khasiru anfusahum, those who have caused harm to their souls, who are doing wrong, evil, who are doing sins knowingly, repeatedly, and they have got no problems, qualms about it. They are the ones who will not believe because they don't want to believe. That was one verse that I chosen for description for today. The other verse is the verse number 20 of the same surah. It mentions, Allazina atayna humul kitab, those whom we have given the book, that is, the people of the book. The Quran mentions about the people of the book in two different styles. At times he says, Allazina atainahumul kitab, like it is mentioned here, those whom we have given the book. This is a mention in the active style, active form. And sometimes the Quran refers to them in the passive form. That is, they are the ones whom book was given. The people who probably were not interested, but they were the ones who were utul kitab. They were given the book. So here the Almighty is talking about the good people belonging to the earlier uh, religions, Abrahamic religions, that is the Jews and the Christians. Those whom we gave the book, yarifunahu, they recognize him, recognize the Prophet, they recognize the Quran, God's mercy be on him. Kama yarifuna abna'ahum, the way they recognize their own sons. That is, if a person loses his son disappears for a while, and then he is brought before his parents will have no problems in recognizing that the boy that has been presented to them is their very own son. The Quran says that is the kind of unmistakable clarity that the people of the book, the good people of the book, have regarding the identity and the claim of the Prophet, God's mercy be on him, that he is God's messenger. It has been so clearly mentioned in their books that good people of the book, the Jews and the Christians, who read the book and take it seriously, take its teachings seriously, they are the ones who know, who acknowledge, who recognize the Prophet and the book that he has brought as clearly as they recognize their own sons. However, the same thing that was mentioned at the end of the earlier verse, the Almighty says over here as well, Allazina khasiru anfusahum fahum la yuminun. Those who have harmed their souls, those who have wronged their souls, fahum la yuminun, they are not going to believe, they are not interested in believing. So the Quran has repeated the same theme clearly, that it is only the good people, good humans, whose nature remains pure, remains pristine, unaffected, tempered by the wrongdoings of the individual. They are the ones who, when they will receive God's message, they will take it seriously, they will be impressed by it, and they will accept it. As I keep mentioning, and I've mentioned in a recent writing piece that I've shared with some people, that those Muslims living in the Western society, they should take it as a part of the responsibility of them while living in the West, that they have a message which they have to communicate to the society, not aggressively, but through their good conduct. And be absolutely sure that if we do it properly, those people who are good, who have not harmed their souls, they will accept and believe in it sooner or later. We are not allowed to, we are not supposed to blame anybody, but we should quietly and confidently continue with delivering the message through our deeds first, and whenever it's needed through our words as well. That brings me to the second part of the presentation of today, program that we are doing. And that has to do with the understanding of what Sunnah is. As I mentioned in my earlier presentations, that while on the one hand, what exactly is the Quran? is unmistakable. It's a book of God that begins with Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, and ends at Minal Jinnati wan Nas, Suratul Nas. The same clarity is not there regarding what is Sunnah. And this lack of clarity has caused many Muslims to remain confused. So, what I did in my last two presentations was that I presented two different views on what is Sunnah. One view I said was the most popular, according to which everything that the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, said or did constituted Sunnah. The second point of view claimed that there is nothing in religion apart from the Quran for the guidance of Muslims, and therefore Muslims should not look for any Sunnah. Now I am presenting a third understanding. It is less known, but academically the most sound. Obviously, when I say the most sound and reliable, I am presenting my understanding, which should not be accepted unless you are as convinced by the arguments of it as I am. According to this understanding, like the Quran, Sunnah too has come to us in a manner, it has been transmitted to us in a way that it is as authentic, reliable, and unaffected by external influences as the Quran is. And how did it happen? Well, it happened because, like in the case of the Quran, similarly in the case of Sunnah, the two important criteria of reliability of transmitting message from one generation to the other were satisfied. And those criteria are the criteria of ijma, all people of a generation agreeing to an understanding, and tawatur. Ijma is consensus, and tawatur, uninterrupted continuity of the same ijma. All people of the first generation of Muslims, the companions of the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, they all agreed that the Quran is God's book, and it is from Alham to Wan Nas. And that agreement continued uninterrupted from the first generation to the second to the third, and we have also received the same Quran. Likewise is the case with Sunnah. There's no difference whatsoever between the Quran and the Sunnah as far as its reliability is concerned. God has not delivered his message, he has not arranged for his messenger to transmit his message to the next generations in a manner that they remain confused, unclear. Some people know more about it, some people know less about it, and all sorts of questions, confusions, and differences are there. Not at all. That is an unfortunate allegation on God's message. God's message in its original core form is absolutely clear, reliable, and agreed upon. And that is the Quran and Sunnah. Sunnah, like prayers, we say prayers 5 times a day, etc. According to this understanding that I am presenting to you, this Sunnah was not initiated by the Prophet Muhammad, God's mercy be on him. It was a religious tradition, practice of the earlier prophets as well. And the last prophet, God's mercy be on him, he continued with that tradition. He caused the religious traditions of the earlier prophets to be purified, to be brought back to their original form, introduced a few changes that were needed at the time when he was presenting those traditions, and thus the religious traditions of the earlier messengers, earlier prophets, continued uh, in their pristine form. So the claim is, as the Quran says, that it's not just that the last prophet, God's mercy be on him, started prayers, salat. Salat was said by, formal prayers were said by every prophet. That is what the Quran is telling the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, in Surah An-Nahl, chapter 16, verse 123. The Quran is telling the Prophet that Summa awhayna ilayk. Thereafter, we sent divine revelation to you, O Prophet. What? Anittabi' millata Ibrahim Hanifa, that you follow the religion of Ibrahim, who was absolutely focused, وَمَا كَانَ مِنَ الْمُشْرِكِينَ, and he was not from amongst the polytheists. In other words, the Almighty asked his last messenger to follow the religion, the religious tradition of Ibrahim alayhi salam. And what was that? That was exactly what we call Sunnah. Hajj, Salat, fasting, Saum, Zakat, Jummah prayer, bathing the body of the dead, covering the dead body with pieces of cloth, going for the Salat of Janaza, burying the dead, and so on. There's so many, saying Assalamu alaikum rahmatullah, and there are many others. Now, there is this list of practices which are, some of them are mentioned in the Quran, others are not even mentioned. The Quran refers to them in a way that they are there, they are happening. I mean, they are a reality. So, there is this beautiful relationship between the Quran and Sunnah, wherein the Quran is the text, the book of guidance. It mentions faith, its arguments, it mentions the principles of religion, etc. But the Sunnah are the practices which are mentioned, which were practiced in the tradition, religious tradition of the earlier prophets, and were continued by the last prophet. These are practices which cover a lot of ground. They are applicable to different areas of human living or of our life. For instance, Sunnah is found in acts of worship. As I mentioned, we have Salat, we have Zakat, we have Saum, we have Etikaf, Hajj and Umrah. We slaughter our animals. We do Takbirat in the 4 or 5 days of Hajj, the way we did recently, etc. We also have been given Sunnah practices which the entire Ummah follows. Why? Because there is ijma, complete agreement, unanimity right from day one, and that unanimity has continued till today in the form of uninterrupted continuity. We have customs and etiquette like we must eat with our right hand. Just give you an example. Whenever I do a program on Facebook or otherwise live, and I'm in a habit of sometimes drinking tea or eating something like I'm doing right now. And you know what happens? I find on the Facebook invariably a message written by some good Muslim saying, please don't eat with your left hand. Because what they see is apparently that it's coming from my left hand, although I eat it from my right hand, and I keep telling them that, look here, it's the mirror view that you're getting, and therefore it's just the opposite. What I'm saying is that this is because eating with right hand was also introduced as a sunnah by the Prophet, may God's mercy be on him, and the entire ummah knows about it. when we start doing things that are important, like for instance, we consume food, etc., we begin by saying Bismillah Rahman Rahim, Tasmiyah. Uh, you know, we say salam to each other when we greet each other, Assalamu alaikum, wa alaikum assalam. Sometimes we add additional words. Likewise, if somebody sneezes, he says Alhamdulillah, and that is responded to by the others who say Yarhamakullah, and he again says Yahdikumullah, Yahdikallah. This is also part of the practice that has been introduced. Likewise, we have been asked to, men have been asked to clip their stashes, to keep them within the limits of their lips. We also remove hair from our armpits, and also beneath the navel. Boys, when they are born to Muslim families, they're circumcised, etc. Eid al-Fitr, Eid al-Azha, these are the sunnahs that the Prophet, may God have mercy be on him, introduced as customs and etiquette. In social interaction, we have the sunnahs of nikah, talaq. They are mentioned in some degree in the Quran as well, but the mention is actually in the category of clarifying, answering questions. But this practice, it introduced practically. In the case of edibles, what we eat, the sunnah that was introduced was the sunnah of tazkiyah, that is, the blood of animals should get drained. It should not be allowed to remain in the body of the dead animals, so it should be hung in a manner that it drains. And likewise, we are to pronounce the name of God. Again, some of these practices are mentioned in the Quran, but they are mentioned in a way that they remind or they clarify or answer questions, but they go hand in hand with the Quran. So this is the third view, which in our humble opinion is the most convincing view. This view regarding Sunnah, it answers the questions that arose in the case of the first two concepts, the first two points of view. And this understanding of Sunnah is what enables us to know that our religion, both in the form of the Quran and Sunnah, is fully preserved. Now that brings me to the third topic that I have to discuss today. And this is because of the good efforts of Maratib Sahab. He has required me to add another dimension to this program. So today I have chosen a subject which is more particularly significant for the Muslims who are living in the West. What we find in the West, and I heard many people speaking about it in my recent visit to UK, that there are gays, there are lesbians in the Western society. Most certainly there are those in the Eastern society as well, but because in our society people don't talk a lot about it, and they are more vocal, outspoken and prominent in their presentations. In the West, what exactly is the stance of Islam about these people? The fact of the matter is that the Quran clearly condemns obscenity time and again. It mentions that obscenity, fawahish, fuhush, the singular is fuhush and the plural is fawahish, is one of the 5 things, categories of human behavior that have been condemned as haram by the Almighty. And it is mentioned in, apart from other passages of the Quran, in verse 33 of Surah Al-Araf, Surah number 7, verse 33. قُلْ حَرَّمَ رَبِّيَ الْفَوَاحِشَ مَا ظَهَرَ مِنْهَا وَمَا بَطَنَ. Tell them that my Lord has condemned as haram, prohibited, what is obscene, what is fuhush, whether it is done openly or whether it is done in hiding. What constitutes fuhush is getting indulged in sex-related activities outside the marriage institution of marriage. If there is any such activity which is undertaken by two individuals who are not husband and wife, what they are doing is fuhush, is unacceptable. Obviously, the question arises that who are husband and wife? Husband and wife are a man and a woman who both declare in public that from the day they choose to become husband and wife, they are now going to be recognized, should be acknowledged by the society as a family, as husband and wife. They have to be a man and a woman. It cannot be a man and a man or a woman and a woman. Why? Because it's unnatural. The natural relationship that the Almighty has created for the purpose of procreation, continuing next generations, is the relationship between a man and a woman. This procreation doesn't happen in the case of any other relationship. Moreover, it is only the relationship which causes children to be born that has been declared as pure, as clean. Even in the case of husband-wife relationship, God has asked believers not to indulge in activities, ways which He has stopped them from doing. And it has been mentioned in a language which suggests that people know what is pure and what is not. So the Almighty says, go to your wives from where the Almighty has asked you to, allowed you to. Min haythu amarakumullah. This is verse 222 of Surah Al-Baqarah. So the reference is easy. Chapter number 2, verse number 222. When we talk about the relationship, physical relationship between a man and a man, and or a woman with another woman, then that purity is not possible. It is unnatural. Humans know about it already. Therefore, there is no chance that a man can get married to a man or a woman can get married to a woman. It is only recently that this movement has become more popular, and because of, allow me to say, because of the exaggerated value attached to freedom of thought, freedom of expression, freedom of action in the Western society, this unnatural activity, unnatural relationship has been almost approved by the Western society at various degrees of approval in different parts of the Western and now even the Eastern world. God's religion, which has come to guide us humans, does not allow it, doesn't sanction any such relationship. Humans have had inclinations of that kind right from the beginning. Why is it so? Well, it's a completely different domain of investigation. Some people very strongly claim that there are men and women who are born like that. Right now, it's not my my agenda, my project to talk about whether it's an acceptable claim or not. All that I would want to say is that even if this claim is correct, that there are some men who simply do not get attracted towards women, they get attracted towards fellow men, and there are some women who get attracted towards only women, that does not mean that they should be allowed to indulge in what they are attracted towards. People who come with a claim that this cannot stop themselves from committing theft, or even in this domain of sex morality, if a man says that I am not satisfied with my wife, I am inclined towards other ladies, or likewise a lady says like that, we would not allow it. There are many strong inclinations within us humans, which even if they are strong, we have been asked to put a check on them, to not allow them to go beyond limits, to do sabr, to be patient, to be firm and steadfast. That's what the test trial of this life is all about. What we might say is that given that we know that God is kind and merciful, and we know, for instance, that there are some people who, by the manner they are, the way they have been designed, they are more inclined toward doing certain evils than others. And it is difficult for them to resist the temptations. If that is the case, then all that we can say is that the person should fight himself, herself, should not indulge in crime, in evil, but if it happens, should seek forgiveness from the Almighty and continue to fight the inner inclinations towards evil. And when the person is doing that, going by that strategy, and does things that are wrong in some cases, and then feels bad about it, God hopefully is going to be forgiving. That is a completely different matter. However, what gays and lesbians are doing today, their movement and the kind of popularity that they are gaining, is that they want this act of extramarital sex, which is obscenity, fuhush, they want it to be legitimized. So they want that the society should recognize, acknowledge their right, that the evil they are doing is not evil, it is legitimate. This is something which Islam would never allow. If we know that there is some affair between two individuals which is illegitimate, we've been asked not to share this piece of information with anybody else. If we know the person or the individuals, we should talk to them and we should ask them to refrain from it, because it is evil. However, to justify those acts and to undertake a movement to make the entire behavior, attitude legitimate is obviously something which is not acceptable to Islam. We know that the Quran mentions the fact that there was at least one nation of a messenger, Lut alayhi salam, who were indulged in this crime, in this evil in a big way. They used to do it in the public as well. the Almighty destroyed them, not because they were indulged in this crime. They destroyed the nation of Lut like he punished all other nations who received God's message through his messengers, Rasul, and then the nations rejected them. So, like in the case of the nation of Nuh alayhi salam, Hud alayhi salam, Saleh alayhi salam, the nation of Lut alayhi salam was also punished because they rejected the message of God that they received directly from the messenger of God, who made it absolutely clear, unmistakable, that it's God's message. Why did they reject his message? The Quran tells us because they were dirty people. Because, as I mentioned in the first segment of today's presentation, they were the ones, allazina khasiru anfusahum. They had harmed themselves. They have caused their souls to become dirty. And what caused them to harm their souls and make them dirty was their indulgence in homosexuality, in having relationship between men and men, and you never know, between women and women. That was the cause for them to dirty their inner souls. That, when it happened, did not allow them to recognize the message of God, which they rejected, and ultimately they were punished by the Almighty. So that mention of the Quran, even though it was not needed for us to get clarified on the question as to whether homosexuality is allowed or not, but it puts further stamp of confirmation on the reality that it is not allowed. There are some people who think that the Quran does not disallow it. They come up with certain arguments, like, for instance, the Almighty has mentioned which relations are haram or muhtaram or mahram, and it has not mentioned men for men and women for women. The fact of the matter is that the Quran doesn't talk about these things which are absolutely clear. The Quran mentions only those areas of human activities where they can get confused. So there was no need for the Almighty to mention that men cannot have sex relationship with men and likewise women.
Will now be recorded.
So that's one aspect. The other aspect is that there are some people who claim that in the case of Lut alayhi salam and his nation, they were punished not because they were gays, but they were punished because they used to rape. Men would rape men, etc. Well, that too is not correct. The fact of the matter is that the verse or verses that they put across for them to be able to bring home their point of view is actually talking about the fact that when angels came to Lut alayhi salam in the form of handsome young men, the men of the nation of Lut alayhi salam, they hastened towards them in their excitement, in their emotions getting expressed in a manner which was exuberant, etc. But it wasn't that they were indulging in something that was forced in the earlier cases, because the Quran declares that they do it in public and they do it in a manner that they have no qualms about it. So, last word. Gays and lesbians are not allowed in Islam to indulge in extramarital sex the way they do it. However, we as Muslims are to clarify God's word intelligently and politely. We will tell them that this is wrong. We will answer their questions, but we will not go on to condemn them by pointing fingers towards them. That's something which is going to be against the Almighty's wisdom that He has suggested to us in delivering His message. We will socialize with them in a way that we will clarify that we are not declaring what you do is legitimate. We will socialize with them to the extent which is important for us to be able to deliver the message to them. But obviously, we will not socialize with them in a manner or to the extent that is going to affect our own behavior or the behavior of our children. أقول قولي هذا واستغفر الله لي. Now I am available for question answers.
Jazakallah khair. Many thanks. So if an participant has a question, please ask.
Okay. Can I ask?
Yes, Brother Marwan, Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.
Yeah, you can ask.
Okay. Thank you very much for the presentation.
Welcome.
The question I have is in relation to your section on the third interpretation of Sunnah. Unfortunately, I wasn't around for the first two times, so please bear with me. I'm going to make three very quick statements, which hopefully will take less than 20 seconds, so again, please bear with me. So question and statement number one is, what is the basis to state that just because in the opinion of Mawrid and perhaps the rest of the Muslim community that the Sunnah is preserved, that somehow makes it also a legitimate source of religious law? Second statement and question as well is, if the Quran is to be a criterion, that is a furqan, and if we are supposed to judge by it, as is indicated in Surah 5, ayahs 44 to 50, then it must in fact speak on every issue related to our practice. You mentioned that in the Sunnah, there are things not mentioned in the Quran. Therefore, you are stripping the Quran of its role in relation to the guidance and judgment. And the final quick comment is, in the very nature of the Quran, it's described as clear and detailed, and obviously that's in relation to revelation. Further, the role of the messenger is clearly stated to be the delivery, al-balagh. In that case, it says in Surah 5:67, O Messenger, deliver that which has been sent down to you, which is the Quran, from your Lord, and if you do not, then you have not conveyed his message. Basically, the short summary is, there's no clear indication for me from the Quran that there must be some extra source of religious guidance and law. Yet your indication is, in fact, there is, and in fact, that other source has information that is not in the Quran. Therefore, we can't judge it. Anyway, this is the short summary. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Brother Marwan. It was not 20 seconds. You see, I think you are here in this session for the first time. I did try to answer each of these three questions in my previous presentations, but I'll just briefly try to answer them. Obviously, it's not an occasion where we can keep talking to each other, but just very briefly. The basis of Sunnah is actually the Quran itself. I mentioned it when I was presenting it this morning as well, that verse 123 of Surah An-Nahl, Surah number 16, is asking the Prophet to follow the religion of Abraham. Anittabi' millata Ibrahima Hanifa. I mentioned in my earlier presentations that you cannot understand many Quranic verses unless you acknowledge that there was a parallel source which was being practiced alongside the Quran. Like, for instance, the Quran talks about the call towards Jummah prayer without clarifying what it is, and the Quran mentions that the durations of the day, which are the times of privacy, are min qabli salat al-fajr and min ba'di salat al-isha. One of them is before Fajr prayer and one of them is after Isha prayer. You cannot make any head or tail out of what it means unless you acknowledge that these prayers were actually being held, and we know that they were being held in Medina, and ever since that time they were transmitted in a manner that there is complete agreement and uninterrupted continuity. Second question that you mentioned is, that the Quran calls itself Al-Furqan, and if you add another source, then it would tantamount to stripping the Quran of its role of Al-Furqan. The Quran calls itself Al-Furqan, which really means that it distinguishes right from wrong. That doesn't really mean that it is actually claiming that it is saying everything. I talked about the problem of gays and lesbians right now. Okay, some people might say that the mention of gays is there in the story of the nation of Lut alayhi salam, but there's no clear mention of lesbians. The Quran doesn't tell us that we cannot consume the flesh of dogs, cats, lions, tigers, etc. They were obvious. The Quran only mentions what is less obvious for guidance and clarification. The Quran being Al-Furqan, that is its source, which is the ultimate criterion between the right and wrong, means that whenever there is going to be a dispute in the matter of morality, in the matter of belief, in the matter of Sharia, and the Quranic statement would be final. It being Al-Furqan or the ultimate criterion doesn't mean that it includes everything in its fold. In actual fact, if you look at this description, it means quite the contrary. It is the criterion and not a source which is mentioning each and every component of the Almighty's expectations from humans. The third thing that you mention is the Quran mentions that it mentions everything, and it asks the Prophet to deliver whatever has been required from him to be delivered. I also took up this point in my earlier presentation and clarified that when the Quran says that Torah as well as the Quran are tafsilan li kulli shay, it really means that it is the tafsil of everything that was needed for humans to know through God, through divine revelation, at the time when the Quran was being revealed. If that's not the right understanding, then obviously the expression tafsilan li kulli shay would require that we understand that it explains everything, no matter what. I clarified at that point that the Quran mentions salat time and again, but doesn't give any tafsil, any details. Likewise, I mentioned about Jummah, etc. So the understanding that the Quran is the only source, which I took up for discussion in my last presentation, is what we believe is not convincing. And we can always agree to disagree.
Right. I have a quick question about third segment of gays and lesbians. And there is a very vast topic, especially in the Western context, because there are different social domains associated with gays and lesbians. But my question is very scientific, with scientific connection, and that is if because we as a human are evolving, and science is also evolving. Medical science is trying to find root causes why gays and lesbians tendencies are increasing in the society. So, if for some reason, if medical science is able to find root causes, and then the sympathies will go with more lesbian and gays, how Islam will defend it? Still, it will be considered as an evil, and or we will have a soft corner as the scientific fact will be flashing.
You see, let me give you an example to help me answer your question. We all agree, all humans agree, that stealing is morally despicable. It's not acceptable. But we all know that at times some people are compelled to steal because of their compelling circumstances. We know, for instance, that Umar Raziyallahu anhu during his caliphate, he withdrew the punishment for theft because it was time of famine and people didn't have enough food. So there are two different things. An evil, a sin is a sin. It's an evil. However, we must acknowledge that in the case of certain individuals and in the case of certain circumstances, the seriousness of the crime, the evil nature of a bad deed gets lessened, diluted in the eyes of God because the person is in difficulty. The Quran tells us that even though consuming, let's say, pork or carrion or blood is prohibited. However, if there are circumstances which are difficult, compelling, then if a person consumes it only to the extent that it's necessary for it to survive and without relishing it, then God is forgiving. So, if at some stage we come to learn about the fact, and probably we know about it even now, that there are some people who, in their very constitution, the way they have been designed, there is something that causes them to be inclined towards their own gender for the purpose of gratification. What we will say is that they should still have control on themselves, knowing that it's wrong, like we would say to people who are poor and there is a huge rich-poor gap in a society, that they should still not steal. We cannot declare that stealing is allowed. Likewise, we would not declare that indulging in homosexuality is allowed in Islam. What we will do is that we will tell people to have control of themselves. This is a trial of life. Please your God by doing sabr, by being patient. However, if they do something wrong, despite their best efforts to contain it, to not do it, we will hope that the Almighty is going to be lenient on them, knowing that they are trying their best to control this inner urge. But in no way any scientific progress, any new understanding that confirms that this inclination is there would cause us to declare this evil as not evil, as acceptable. Quite the same way as we would never ever declare that when the circumstances are difficult, poor people are allowed to steal. They are welcome to commit thefts whenever they want to. So let's distinguish between these two things. One is the inclination, weakness in a person, and the other is the fact that what a person is inclined to do is indeed evil. Am I? Sorry.
There is a question from Fatima Akram on the Facebook, and actually there are two parts. He's saying, is surrogacy allowed? Is not allowed in Islam? And second is, what is the ruling of Islam on transgender of the people?
You see, as far as the first part is concerned, when you say surrogacy, it could mean a number of things. Sometimes it so happens that a child is born to parents, but the child is breastfed by some other lady, which is perfectly okay. We've got ruling that the other lady is also going to be considered as a mother. She is also going to be given due respect. If you are talking about the fact that another lady is used, her womb is used for the child to be there for the time of pregnancy, and then it's taken as the child of the mother whose egg initially it was, but was transferred to another lady's womb. This is something obviously tricky. There could be two opinions about it. There is one opinion that obviously says that it's wrong. There is another opinion that says that so long as the identity of the egg and the cell originating from the parents is clear, and a third lady is used only for the purpose of carrying the baby in her womb for the duration of pregnancy, then it's like breastfeeding services offered by a lady. Such matters which have got to do with something new that has emerged because of science and technology would always require scholars to do ijtihad. I've only mentioned before you both opinions, but what exactly is the correct stance is either for a larger group of scholars to come together and decide for a certain country for it to become a law or it to be outlawed, or if it is the case of an individual where no law is applicable, then the individual should seek the opinion of scholars and should make up his or her mind, satisfying his or her conscience as to whether it seems to be acceptable or not. So, it's that way that we're going to decide. As far as transgenders are concerned, these are the people who are born in the manner that they are, different from most of us. They are like any other human. They should be treated with respect. In fact, even more, because they are special, they are unique, they are different, and in a sense they are in a minority. There is no way that they can be mistreated, they can be insulted, and a society which doesn't take care of them and isolates, ostracizes them, puts them in a category which is only meant for them to give entertainment to the rest of the society. That society is morally corrupt and really is liable to be accountable to the Almighty for what they're doing.
Jazakallah khair. Very, very well said. Many thank you for all participants, and we are very grateful to our Dr. Khalid Zaheer, and we appreciate his timekeeping for all four segments. I think he has a great skill to be restricted within the time.
My only job is teaching, so I have to do them, that's what I'm trained to do.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Inshallah, Dr. Khalid Zaheer will continue his live session with new topic as well, and with new verses of Quran in new segments. Title I will announce as well after discussion with Dr. Khalid Zaheer.
And please ask them to suggest topics as well, so that I can choose from them.
Yeah, absolutely. But if somebody wants to address by Dr. Khalid Zaheer on certain topic, they are very welcome. They can contact Dr. Zaheer Ahmed, Dr. Khalid Zaheer directly or to me or to any team member of Mawrid, and we will try to address in our live session. Jazakallah khair for everyone.
Jazakallah
And inshallah we'll see you in the next.
Inshallah. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.